This video will cover Chapter 18, titled The Victorians Make the Modern. Our first section that we will be discussing is commerce and culture. So, one of the things that we discussed in class was that with industrialization, life improved, but also brought upon other challenges. As discussed in Chapter 17, the main things of that chapter were on big business, labor unions, and immigrants, and how they all interconnected each other. So for this section, we're going to begin with the rise of consumerism or shopping, purchasing. And as we discussed in class, as more products flood the market, more products are available for Americans. So some of the things that rise at this time, as we discussed, were uh, department stores, chain stores that make consumer products available to the public. So one of the things that consumers did was they spent a lot of money in advertisement. Like we said last week, roughly in north of $95 million a year companies spend on advertisement. So these companies, these department stores are going to begin to target audiences. For the department stores, they're going to target women, mainly because women in those times, men went to work. Women, especially middle class and upper class, had more time to spend. So they eventually had the money, had time, and went and eventually shopped. So department stores are going to offer childcare. They're going to offer tea rooms. They're going to offer store credit. They're going to try to lure the consumer into the stores. And if you remember, we talked about how the the women were lured into these department stores by providing almost every service, right? We talked about a department store or a shopping center having a meat shop, a dentist, a doctor, a bank, stores, and just many of opportunities. So another area where the target audience comes into play is entertainment. So Barnum and Bailey is a traveling show, pretty much a circus that puts on entertainment for different major cities and some rural towns as well. And the idea was that Barnum and Bailey wanted to provide a family experience. Not they don't try to exclude anybody. They wanted to include people, and so that's something that comes to show you that they were really trying to incorporate family experiences to create family experiences. So you can think that consumerism, pretty much industrialization, and the ability to partake in consumerism should be a democratic experience. But the reality was that it was not. It just basically became more. It provided more opportunities for segregation, for racism to be present. So one of the services that arises at this time, and we discussed about railroads already, but one of the things that arises are these sleeping cars and dining cars. Railroad trains that eventually you travel across the country where you can sleep in, you eat there, but they're going to start to designate men or gentlemen's cars, ladies' cars, and one of the things that has to be acknowledged is that these places were not to be used by people of color. So here you begin to see that there is going to be a rise in discrimination, racism, during this age of consumerism. So one of the things that arises that intensifies the racism is the Plessy versus Ferguson court case. That basically makes it legal to be racist. Separate but equal basically says you, as long as you can have separate facilities as long as you provide the equal service. And I'll explain in some pictures in a few seconds. But the idea is that this court case basically brought legality to discrimination and segregation. So for most Americans, this is a time period, as I mentioned, after in the Reconstruction. Uh, African Americans really go into hiding for about 100 years because of the violence and the bad experiences that they generate. So even though they were segregated, the cars were segregated, it offered for economic opportunities for African Americans. These were some of the best paid jobs working for the railroads, whether it was for a porter or a server on the dining train. You were able to have more financial opportunities as an African American. So we talked about the different the birth of the department store providing many services to the consumers. We talked about the train, and you can see this picture. All the passengers are white, but the servers are black. And so one of the things that you see is that there's a sense of racism that develops. This is another picture showing you what that would look like inside. These are the fancy cars, mainly the Pullman cars. And we talked about Barnum and Bailey and their traveling show. And again, they were just trying to show, provide families with a good time by showing, the oddities that exist in our life. So you eventually see some oddities, like I mentioned. And this is a picture that displays, it's a perfect illustration of uh, the separate but equal ideology. White, colored, same water, two different fountains, separate but equal. They have separate water fountains, but it's the same water, so it's equal. So that allows for it to happen. So this happened in restaurants. This happened in theaters. So it was basically what we call segregation, and this is going to go into, like I said, schools, restaurants, hotels, and so on. So a new topic that arises at this time is it's an impact from um, industrialization and the work that is being done. White collar workers begin to feel that they're not really using their they're not really being physical in their work because they are white collar workers. If you remember, they are the ones who are basically are the supervisors. They're not really doing hard work, and so the entrance of athletics provides that notion of being able to show the masculinity that was being, in a sense, taken away from being white collar workers. And so one of the things, or one of the first organizations, the YMCA, really promotes sports because they feel like by going into the gyms and providing religious conversations, the American is purifying themselves, they're being clean, and they're also becoming stronger. And it's just part of, of self-help or being healthy. You when you exercise, you feel healthier. And so for most Americans, while some business first began to push back against athletics and sports, they begin to see the products, the positivity that comes with being in sports. And so being active and getting stronger, being athletic, it's healthier. And not only is it healthy for physically, but emotionally, mentally, it provides teamwork opportunity, camaraderie among teammates that are also coworkers. So that's something that is going to be to be introduced. So some sports are introduced at this time. Basketball, which is first literally a peach basket. They take out the bottom and they eventually use for the first time a soccer ball, right, as a basketball, and eventually turns the ball evolves into what it is today, basketball. And they also invent volleyball. Again, these are all sports that are invented due to the 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 need for activity. Um, Another sports that becomes really popular is baseball. It really is known as the national pastime. Basically, it's the American sport, and this is not only for these sports, and not just the idea of participating in the sports, but also being uh, fans of the sport. So eventually buying tickets. So that's also a part of consumerism. You're participating in the sport by going to watch it. Just like I mentioned, the idea of discrimination arises. So just like opportunities in railroads and in theaters, you're going to see that discrimination will happen in sports as well. And for those who are attending and for those who are participating in the sports, many African Americans eventually began to create their own leagues, kind of like baseball did not allow African Americans to play on the baseball league, so they eventually created the Negro Leagues that eventually became very popular, and it offered an opportunity for African American men to display their skills. And then one of the final sports that is introduced around this time is football. Sometimes considered a very dangerous sport because many people have died in the sport. And so early on, you saw a lot of deaths in college. So eventually that scared a lot of individuals. But the idea is that many people like the roughness and the adrenaline that you got from playing football. So that's something that came to be a reality for many Americans. So this is a picture of the basketball. First basketball, as you can see, is a soccer ball with the basket, and it came to be known as basketball. Here's some pictures of early baseball. The first some of the first glove, it literally felt like a hand. The Negro Leagues, the expansion or the creation of Negro Leagues, and then football, like I mentioned, were part of the new sport. Rough, if you ever seen, there's a movie called Concussion. Will Smith, he goes into the idea of the negative impact of football. And again, it was a form of physical activity that many people were in search of. The final part of this slide is to talk about nature. So nature becomes a big part of the United States, especially as we're industrialized and becoming more stuck in cities, in concrete jungles. Americans are in search of something more natural. So one of the big supporters and advocates for natural spaces is John Muir, who eventually sets up the Sierra Club. He basically explores the entire Yosemite National Park, and as you're going to see, as some progressive presidents, we'll talk about the progressives later on, the progressives really pushed for these natural spaces. The idea was that Americans needed that opportunity to escape from the realities of cities, the hustle and bustle of cities. Working long hours, it becomes stressful. So being out in nature also brings about some mental stability, some mental health, and just being out in nature feels healthy. You feel you kind of escape all that you have, all the issues, problems that you have in the city, and eventually can take in the natural beauty of these places. And so that's one of the things that you will see is that American governments begin to create opportunities for Americans to be able to enjoy the natural beauty of the United States of America.